Well, I'm excited to be back with people and in person and to be in a room. And this is my first time speaking live in a really long time. So give me a little grace tonight if I need it. We'll see if I need it. It is a kind of an awkward room on top of that, so I definitely might need it. But I'm so excited to be here. And as we jump in to tonight, I want to share some of what I believe God is leading our church to, what's coming up next, some really exciting things for what's in store. And I'm going to start with a little teaching as well to give some context to that. But before we jump into that, I wanted to just celebrate and thank God for what he has done over the last year. Because despite COVID, despite some crazy changes for all of us, God has still been at work, and it has been an amazing year. So some of the things to celebrate this year, number one, is that we were able to launch online and some neighborhood gatherings and continue to meet as a church not even continue to meet as a church for the very first time. Some of the other things that we got to do is we got to launch an online ministry and a video ministry, something that for most churches is not what you do when you start out. Usually it takes years, and so we're going to continue that, and we've seen some fruit from that already. We've also been able to develop some great relationships with some community organizations and partners. We've got to develop with Trace Elementary School, with the teachers there and some of the parents and students. We've been working with Opening Doors, which is a homeless ministry, consistently. There's been groups going there every couple of weeks. And one of the things that really stood out to me through that ministry, it's actually just a nonprofit, and the leader of that nonprofit, David, had said at the beginning of COVID, all the churches that were helping out stopped helping. And it really hit home with me about a month ago because some of our team, actually my mom who helps lead that team, came home after serving on Saturday. And she said, somebody came up to her and said, I have some questions about baptism and God and faith. And he said, you are the only church here. I don't know who else to ask. And so it just struck me the importance and the value of what we're doing to continue to build some of those relationships, particularly in the middle of this season. We've got to start relationships with Foster the Bay, and there's some people on our team that have a passion for foster care, and I can't wait to see what God does with that. Already, we've got to contribute to the launch of New Valley Church in Evergreen and the Bay Area Church Planning Network, both financially and in other ways. We've been partnering and building other churches already. We've seen some of our teams share some amazing stories of what God's been doing in their life, and it's been great to celebrate. And all of that, the biggest thing is that we're still here and we're still going strong, and pretty much every pastor I talk to says you have had a successful year if you're still here. Because the unfortunate thing is not every church is, and not everybody is still doing ministry, and God has been incredible. And so all of that aside, it would be an amazing year, just the fact that we're here and we're gathered and we're still going forward. But on top of that, one of the best things that I love celebrating as a church is that in January, we got to baptize the very first 2 people as a church and see people come to faith. And so that is just the start of what God is going to do as we continue to move forward with this church. And let me get this out. It's weird not speaking to a camera, let me tell you. There's like transitions. You can't just cut the screen and be like, you know what, nobody's going to see that. It didn't connect. It'll be okay afterwards. It's fine. Well, it may or may not work. We'll see. Last week, if anybody saw it, it's okay if you didn't, but I shared Hebrews 10 last week, and I want to open with that passage of Scripture tonight. It says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. I want to just point out a couple things about this passage as we get started. Number one, I'm grateful that we haven't neglected meeting together over the last year. COVID has necessitated that we change some of the strategies of how we do that, but we've continued to meet together. But there's this call of the importance of gathering. You can't just only see people from a distance or online or whatever it might be. But it's important for us to gather as a people because something happens when we gather. There's something here that is present when they come together in a gathering in the temple of God, in the sanctuary of God, that we see as his presence is there, and that's something that we can't do without, and that there's no substitute for that. We'll continue to do online ministry. We've seen fruit with that. It's great when you have to travel for the weekend or you can't be there for whatever might take place, but there's something about being in the room. I think a lot of us probably felt that tonight. Maybe we're back for the first time, and it's there's something different when God is in the room with us. And as we look to what is next, I've been really reflecting on Psalm 73. And I'm not going to read the whole psalm to us tonight. It's not actually that long, but I would encourage you guys this week, write that down, Psalm 73. And this week, spend some time reading through it, because I feel like it is the writer, Asaph, his context is pretty similar to our context. And he starts out by talking about how he seems to see the wicked prospering, and he seems to see people that aren't following God, and he wonders, is being a good person worth it? Is it worth it to follow God? What is going on with the world around me? And then in the middle of that song, that psalm, or at verse 16, it says, "But when I thought to understand this, it seemed to me a wearisome task until I went into the sanctuary of God, and then I discerned their end." See, he's processing this, he's thinking about it, he's pouring his heart out to God, and it's not until he enters the sanctuary of God, literally in Hebrew, the presence of God, where he goes and he meets with God in that place, and that's when he finds understanding. That's when he finds wisdom. That's one of the reasons we gather as a church. There's multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is because when people come into the church, the gathering of God's people, and his presence is there, we can't help but be transformed. People that don't know who Jesus is come to know who he is by encountering his presence. Those of us that do know who he is are changed. We're encouraged, we're refreshed, we're equipped to go and live out our purpose in his church, to live out our purpose as we go about our weeks in the world. And there's something so valuable about us gathering together, because in that place is God's presence. And this is our vision, that as a church we would come together and host God's presence, and that lives would be transformed as we do that. And the writer ends in verse 28 with a changed attitude from the beginning of the psalm. He says, "But for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the Lord God my refuge, that I may tell of all your works." He knows no matter what happens, his strength comes from God. And he's not just sitting back with that. He's encouraged to go out. We come as a church so that we can go out into the world to share the good news of who Jesus is. We come together so that we can encourage, so that we can love, so that we can serve our community. And the writer knows this. He says, "I came into the sanctuary of God, and I was forever changed and transformed." The beginning of 2021, I felt like God was giving Romans 4 to us in our church. And Ali read it at the beginning. I'm going to read it again. It says, "No unbelief made him waver," that's Abraham, "concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith as he gave glory to God, fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised." Many of you have been with us since even before COVID happened. And our vision, our strategy for Tekoa took a sharp turn, as did every business and pretty much everything in the world, especially if you live in California. And as that happened, it hasn't looked like I thought it would. It hasn't looked like many of you maybe thought it would. But as we celebrated the beginning, God has been at work this year. And I've been holding to that promise. We even sang that song that I will prophesy God's promise, that I'm going to trust, that I'm going to speak forth, that God has said something and it's going to come to pass. And there's this vision that God has given us for a church that he gave us 2.5 years ago, and that hasn't changed. Some of the timing of it might have changed. Some of how it's worked out might have changed. But God is still at work, and we trust fully, just as Abraham did, that God said it, and so that it is going to happen. And this is the truth. We are not fighting for a victory. We are fighting from a place of victory. Let me say that again. We're not fighting for a victory. We're fighting from a place of victory. Romans 8:37 says that we are more than conquerors. We are here because the Bay Area, frankly, needs more churches. There are not enough churches to reach the people here. We live in the part of the country with the most people that don't go to church, the most people that once went to church that no longer go to church, and the least number of churches per people anywhere in this country. There are people that do not have the same hope, the same perspective and life and vision that we do, and that is why we're here. We're also here because people need purpose, and this is the mission that God has given us in our church, that we would be a place where people connect to God and find their purpose. And that comes from me. Some of you have heard this story, that I was living in LA before I met Allie. I was working in sales and living my life and making money and being successful, and I was confronted with, what am I doing here? I get ministry, that's over here, what I do for God, but what am I doing in my job and with my friends and all the rest of my life? What am I doing with that? I seem to be successful from the world's standards, but what am I doing? And I was in the middle of that I crashed my motorcycle, and I was like, maybe I should figure this out because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And it was in the middle of that I got connected to a church plant in the LA area. It was in the middle of that as I went into God's sanctuary, into that church, and I met with God, God changed me, and I was transformed, and I began to figure out and understand, what did it mean to go to work on Monday? What did it mean to go hang out with my friends on Friday night and have perspective in that? And that's our vision for us as a church, that as we connect people to God, that they would understand their purpose, and that's evangelism, that people would know who God is. And the other part of that is that we would help them live it out. That's discipleship. We want to equip people, not just say, hey, go do it, that's great, you're on your own. But we want to walk with you to help you find and understand what that is and how do you live that out. There's a further part of the vision that God gave us specifically 2.5 years ago that God spoke so clearly that time. I was sitting again in the sanctuary of God. I was worshiping Him, and God started speaking one of the most clearly He's ever spoken to me in my life. And in that, He said that there is a battle coming, and that the reason that we're launching this church specifically is to prepare people for that battle. And not to get crazy spiritual or weird or anything tonight, but I think we know, there's something deep in us that we know that both the physical part of life can be challenging and also the spiritual part of it. There is a battle that we face in life, and God has said that there is more coming, but it's not a negative thing. We need to prepare for it because we don't want to be caught off guard. And this week even, as I was confronted, and some of our team even was confronted with some of the battles of life and the battles of what we face when we follow God, I was confronted with, this is so central. We need to know how to fight it. And the reason we're here as a church is to equip people for that, to walk alongside you, to encourage you in the middle of it. And we need to prepare for it. But it's an amazing thing to be a part of, because when we are a part of it, when we see God at work, we see Him when we're a part of it. When we fight, we don't actually fight. God is the one that fights on our behalf. And unfortunately, in history, sometimes Christians have misunderstood what God meant when He said that there is a battle present. Some of Jesus' disciples misunderstood what it meant when God said that there was a battle. When Jesus was about to go to the cross, some of the disciples picked up their swords and were like, okay, now's the time, we got it. And Jesus said, no. The way that you are to fight is not with weapons. The way that you are to fight is with worship of God. That Jesus would lay His life down and love those around Him and not fight with their weapons. And as a church, we are excited to see what God does, because when we fight the battle, we get to bring God's light to the darkness of our city. And what we get to see is we get to see God heal marriages. We get to see Him heal relationships, heal people from anxiety and depression. We get to see Him bring people out of depression and sickness. We get to partner with Him to bring purpose and life to the people of our city. And the battle is coming, and I'm not afraid of the battle because I know that God is on my side. I'm not afraid of it because I know that we fight it from a place of victory. And I love seeing what God does as He is a healer. And as we fight from this place of victory, this is where the name for Tekoa comes from. See, Tekoa was a place where the Israelites didn't fight with their weapons, they fought with their worship. The enemy was coming, and God said, just trust me. Don't go off and fight them. Send your worshipers, and I will provide for you through that. That people would be equipped for the battle of life and spirit, and that they would have a community around them, and that they would see God at work. So how do we do that? We do that as a church that disciples and builds up other people, and we build up his people, a community of people that would go and reach our city, a community of people that would go and make a difference. As we prepare for this battle, as we equip for this battle, we are a church where everyone is welcome and known, where people are valued for who they are and what their background is, a community where everyone can share and grow in their faith journey and be a maturing disciple of Jesus. And as we gather, the presence of God changes people so that they can be encouraged and ignited to live out their purpose, to love God and make disciples. We believe that as we gather and we foster the presence of God, that he changes people, that the Christian is encouraged to go be equipped for life and battle, that the one who doesn't know Jesus encounters him and is transformed. And we believe in the power of the gathering of his people, the hosting of his presence as we gather together, that people are forever transformed in that. So as a church, we are building towards September. That is what's coming. A year after our original timeline and date, we're moving towards September 12th, where we will have a grand opening for our church, where we will launch a weekly, in-person, large gathering of God's people. And I'm looking forward to that day and what God is going to do. And this summer is going to be building to that with events and community outreach and service and all sorts of things to build up towards that weekly gathering that we're going to have. Some people were even asking tonight, which I totally understand, that this place is actually another church's that's being generous and letting us use the place tonight, which we're really grateful for. But as a church, we are looking to rent a space, and you can even join us in prayer for this. We're looking to rent a space between downtown, the SAP Center, the Rose Garden, and the immediate neighborhood surrounding. That area God actually showed to Allie and I 5 years ago when we were in another country and we were praying what was next. God said, right here, this area needs a church. And you can be praying because there's not a lot of churches there, so there's not a lot of options for where do we go, what do we rent? And particularly even there's a few schools, there's a community center that could be great options for us, but COVID is here, and so none of those options are available right now. But God can provide, and so I would invite you to join us for praying for that. I want to share a couple other things that you can join us in praying for. Another one is that God would build our team. We are building towards to have in July 50 people as a part of our team. We need everything from people that will help, people that will wave and say hi, to kids ministry, to worship and production and creative. And there's so many people and so many pieces to this to be geared up for a successful launch. And so we're praying specifically for 50 people in July to be a part of our team. We're also praying for finances. On top of the normal month-to-month expenses for the church, it's going to be $144,000 for the equipment, the marketing, and all the pieces that needs to come into play for us to launch. We need things like speakers. We need things like curriculum and things for the kids' classrooms. We need signs. We need trailers. We need so many different pieces for God to do it. And we want to launch well. We want to have a great experience so that there's as little as possible that's hindering people from connecting with God and his presence. We're also praying, lastly, I would invite you to pray for people to be a part of this. Our vision is not just to bring a bunch of people that know who God is, but the reason we're here is because we want to see people from our community come and find and know Jesus for the very first time. There are so many people in our community that do not know him, and so our heart is that God would do this. He's been doing it already, but our heart is that he would continue to do this and bring the right people that would come and know who Jesus is. I want to invite everybody here tonight as we kind of finish up our time right now. I'm going to invite Neil back up, actually, and the team back up. And I want to invite you, if you're here tonight, to go ahead and pull out your phone. I've said this before online, and you're all behind a screen, so you can do whatever you want. But now you're in the room, so I can see if you do it. So if you want to pull out your phone, I'll give you the website in just a second. Don't check your text or your Instagram or whatever else. I know it's tempting, but you're in church, so God knows. But I want to invite you to fill out a card to let us know just kind of where you're at in the process and in relationship to us as a church. Like I said, we're building a team of people, and what we want to do is be strategic of who is with us so that we can plan well, so that we can be prepared for what God is going to do. And so we'd love to just know where you're at with us. You can let us know. Some of you, you're all in. You've been all in for a really long time. And so let us know that you're there. Or maybe you're not sure. Maybe you have questions. You'd love to talk to us. We would love to talk to you some more. So we'd love to do that. Just let us know that you're not sure. Maybe you just need some time to process. You just heard all this from me. You're not sure. And for others of you, you're here tonight. We're glad you're here tonight. And you're like, you know what? Let me know that when your launches, I'll come to that, but this isn't where God is calling me to right now. That's totally fine as well. So if you go to tekoachurch.org/team, you can go there right now, and on that, there's a team card right at the top. There's a bunch of other info there too. You can look at that later after service about our vision, what's coming up next, some of our strategy. It's a great resource for our team. But right at the top there is that team card. And as we go into our last time of worship, I'm going to go sit in that chair, and I'm going to fill this out right now too, because I've never filled it out. And Allie and I are number 1 and 2 on the team. Some of you might have already beaten me to it by the time I get there, but that's okay. And just let us know where you are at in this process. And the final thing I want to share tonight is that courage does not mean that we have all the answers. Courage means that we know, because God has said it, that the gates of hell cannot prevail against his church. Courage means that no matter what happens, we are running forward because we trust God. And we are fighting not for a victory, but from a place of victory as a church. And I want to invite you guys to run with us as we launch this church. I don't know what's going to happen in 2022, but for this year, would you consider committing to join us, to be a part of what God is doing, and just run with us? This summer, we've got some dates for what's going to happen, but it's going to be fluid because it's 2021 and it's COVID and life is fluid. But run with us, be a part of what God is doing, and see him move and be at work through you. So take some time during this song to pray, to process, fill this out if you want, and to just even declare these words as I talked about. We fight our battles not with weapons, but with worship. And so this song is even a chance for us to do that, to declare the goodness of God and who he